What if I told you that every single handful of soil in your garden, every grain of sand on a beach, actually started its life as a giant mountain? Well, today we're diving into that epic journey, how solid rock gets absolutely pulverized into the ground right beneath our feet. It is an incredible story of brute force and just unbelievable patience. It's so easy to just take soil for granted, right? It's just dirt. But have you ever really stopped and thought about where it all comes from? Like, what kind of powerful natural forces had to align for it to even exist? Believe it or not, the story for all of it starts right here. Solid rock. I mean, every bit of soil you've ever touched, whether it's rich farmland or sandy desert, it all shares the exact same origin story. It's such a simple beginning for something so complex and so vital to life. Now, this incredible transformation from a mountain into the ground we walk on, it has a scientific name, pedogenesis. I know, it sounds a little complicated, but it's really just the story of how soil is born. So let's get into it. Let's start at the very beginning, with the first kind of violent act of creation. Okay, so how in the world do you take a giant solid boulder and turn it into dust? Well, the very first step is just this relentless assault from the elements, a process that we call weathering. To put it simply, weathering is just the process of breaking big rocks down into little ones. But nature is super creative. It doesn't just use a sledgehammer. No, it has two very different strategies for getting the job done. On one hand, you've got physical weathering. This is the brute force method, literally smashing and cracking the rock apart without actually changing what it's made of. And then, on the other hand, there's chemical weathering, which is a much slower, more corrosive attack that actually dissolves the rock and changes its fundamental chemical makeup. So, physical weathering is all about that raw power. I mean, think about the constant grinding force of wind and water, or the surprisingly strong roots of a tiny little plant pushing its way through solid stone, even just the simple, relentless pull of gravity. But one of the most powerful agents of all is something we usually think of as pretty gentle. Yep. Of all these incredible forces, one really stands out as this silent but incredibly powerful destroyer. It doesn't seem like much, but frozen water is one of nature's absolute best rock breakers. Let me show you what I mean. So here's how it works. First, a little bit of water finds its way into a tiny crack in a rock. Then, as the temperatures drop, that water freezes. Now this is the crucial part. As it freezes, it expands, and it acts just like a wedge, forcing that crack to get wider and wider. Over and over again, this cycle of freezing and thawing literally pries the rock apart from the inside out. And here's the number behind that power, 9%. That is how much water expands by volume when it turns to ice. Just imagine that force, pushing outwards from inside a tiny crack in a solid rock, again and again, season after season. It's an absolutely unstoppable wedge that will eventually shatter stone. Okay, so besides the whole brute force attack, there's a much sneakier method, chemical weathering. This isn't about smashing things, it's about dissolving them. The rock gets attacked at a molecular level through things like oxidation, which is basically just the rock rusting, or hydration, where minerals in the rock absorb water and become soft and weak. There's even carbonation, where rainwater becomes a weak acid that can dissolve entire cave systems over thousands of years. And then there's this process called leaching. Leaching is a really cool concept to get your head around. Just think about making a cup of coffee. Hot water flows through the coffee grounds, right? And it dissolves all the good stuff and carries it down into your cup. Well, leaching is the exact same idea, just way slower. Water flows through rock, dissolving soluble minerals and carrying them away, weakening the rock's structure bit by bit over time. So at this point, the rock has been shattered into these tiny particles. A new soil is born. But its story is really just beginning, because now it faces a fundamental choice. Does it stay put, or does it go on a journey? And this choice leads to two main categories of soil. First, you have residual soil. This is the home body. It stays right there on top of the parent rock that it came from. And then you've got transported soil. This is the world traveler. It gets picked up and moved to a totally different place. So who are the travel agents for this worldly soil? Well, you might recognize them. They're the exact same forces that broke the rock down in the first place. Water, wind, massive glaciers. They can all carry soil hundreds of miles from where it was born, while gravity can simply pull it down the side of a mountain. Now, it's really easy to think of this as a one-way street, from rock to soil. But the truth is, it's so much bigger and it's much more of a cycle than a straight line. You see, making soil isn't the end of the story at all. It's actually just one chapter in this huge, continuous loop that we call the rock cycle. And in the world of geology, it turns out that nothing is ever truly finished. Let's just trace this epic journey for a second. It all starts deep in the earth with molten magma, which cools to form igneous rock. Then, that weathering process we just talked about breaks it all down into sediment. That sediment eventually gets buried and pressed together, forming sedimentary rock. If you add incredible heat and pressure to that, it transforms into metamorphic rock. And if things get hot enough, all of it just melts back down into magma, and it's ready to start the whole cycle all over again. And that specific process of turning all that loose sediment back into solid rock, that has a name too. It's called lithification. It's basically just nature's way of gluing and squishing all those little particles back together to create a whole new generation of rock, ready to start its own journey. So the next time you look at the ground, try to remember this. You're not just looking at dirt. You're looking at the living skin of our planet, the temporary, dynamic result of a powerful and constant cycle of creation and destruction. So remember, this isn't just ancient history we're talking about. This is happening right now, all around us. The rock cycle is constantly at work, which leaves us with one final, kind of mind-blowing question. How are these immense, slow-motion forces shaping the very ground beneath your feet at this exact moment?